April the 25th, 1998. My name's Earl Chess. I'm an alcoholic. I invite you to listen to the 45th anniversary of the Men's Home Benefit in Alexandria, Virginia. Thank you, and I hope you like this tape.
And I'm an alcoholic. I hope everybody can hear all right on this thing. I don't think they'll need it. Closer to who? Okay. Please allow me to introduce myself. Okay. Welcome to the 45th anniversary of the Men's Home Spring Benefit. We thank you all for your participation here. It's terrific, and the home appreciates it very, very much. We've had a tremendous year at the home. As you know, we have a golf tournament every year that was a success last year and will be another one this coming year. Our Christmas party and benefit and the spring benefit were both huge successes, and we thank you for your support in all of those. The upcoming years, next year or so, are going to be pretty exciting as well, because we are looking at plans to renovate, add on to, do some addition perhaps on the home, and that's pretty exciting, and it's because of the support of people like you and the special events that we've had too. Before we get to the speaker, we've got to do a little house cleaning, and the first of which is to thank the many people that help make this thing possible every year. And the first is, I'd like to thank the volunteers who did a lot of work, and let's give them all a hand. Jan McAdoo, John Rohrenbeck, Beck to most of you, Doug Gover, Paul Kelly, Mike Gleason, and Julia Copius. They've put a lot into this as well, and spent a lot of time on the home. Especially to I would also like to thank the chairman of this year's benefit, if you stand up and give a wave to the crowd, Mike Gleason. This is my second year on the board, and I've worked with some pretty special people, and I want to take a minute just to mention two of them, actually three of them, because of the work they put into the home, and it has its rewards. And for those of you who are looking for some service work and have good time sobriety, there's always opportunities to serve the home in many ways, the board or some of the committees we have too. So, but when I first came on the board, there was a gentleman who had been on the board for quite some time, and it was so instrumental in the home, the stability of the home, and primarily his leadership in the Sunday morning meetings, chairing that meeting for quite some time, and running the House committee, and keeping the House committee and keeping the House when he took over, it made tremendous leaps and bounds, and I was pleased to work with him, and we owe him a great deal of thanks, and I wish you'd stand up. Tom Harrison, thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julia, and I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I'm also known as the dessert Nazi. And this is how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to the simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. At some of these, we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us, but there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaimed, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. C, that God could and would if he were sought.
Thanks, Julia. For those of you, by the way, who didn't recognize, I'm not Ed Chandler, and I have hair. Tell them I said that. But he was called out and couldn't be here to do this for us tonight, and he's probably working on his congressional luncheon's coming up this Friday. So, our speaker, it's a real honor for me to be able to introduce Michael, because of what he's meant to me personally in my 10 years in this program. I promised him I wouldn't tell any stories, so I won't. But the first time he came up to me to introduce himself to me, I was like all of us. I was nervous. I was scared. I was in a meeting, and he came over to offer me words of encouragement and said, "What's your name?" I said, "Well, Banks. You sound like every preppy asshole I worked with at the White House." And I wasn't sure whether that was good or bad, knowing what he'd been through. So, of course, I was going to get back at him. I told him before the meeting I have saved the Time magazine cover that Michael was on shortly before joining our club. If for those of you who never saw it, it's him trying to get out of the back of a limousine, and it's quite a picture. And but I've part of Michael's, and he'll probably tell it, I want to say part of his original community service was a program in Washington called Clean and Sober Streets that he threw himself into and has continued to throw himself into for almost 12 years now, and it's a wonderful, rewarding program, and he gives of himself not only there, but to many of us that know him and see him in meetings and then outside in breakfast and lunch. It's one of the gifts of this program to me, and I think to many others, is that we meet people from all walks of life. They were brought together by this great equalizer that puts us all in the same pile. And I'm real proud to be a friend of and in the same pile with Mike Deaver.
Well, thank you very much, Banks. See if I can get this adjusted. There we go. Is that fine? Everybody can hear me? Good. My name is Mike Deaver, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm sorry Ed Chandler wasn't here tonight, too, Banks. But Banks and I go back a long ways, and we can laugh and have a good time together. Mike Gleason, thank you for asking me to do this tonight. And John Gray, I think I know where you are, but I wish you were here with us tonight, too. I loved that introduction. You know, there is a thing that my office sends out when I make an occasional speech, and it's I keep editing it down, and it gets longer and longer. And when you sit and have to listen to this over and over again, it reminds me of a story that I heard one time about a fellow who was about 90 years old in a small town in the Midwest, and he had been very successful, and he had given a lot to this town. And one night the entire community came out and had a banquet for him, and they had speech after speech lauding him for his contributions and efforts on behalf of this small town. And when they all got through, he stood up and he said, "I want to thank you for that." He said, "You know, this town's been good to me." He said it was about 70 years ago that, he said there was nothing but a dirt road coming into this town. He said, I had nothing but a knapsack on my back when I came into this town, and he said, I've been very successful. And I'm grateful that I've been able to build the library and begin the symphony and underwrite the Boy Scouts. And he sat down. And as the rest of the evening went on, a little boy came up and tugged on his coat and said, "Excuse me, sir, but just what was in that knapsack?" And the old man said, "Well, as best I can remember, about 50 million in negotiable securities." I have a lot of fun today. I was on an airplane about 6 months ago, coming in from St. Louis, and there was a guy sitting next to me on the plane, and he never spoke until we began to come in to National, or to Ronald Reagan Airport, as some of us call it these days. And he leaned over and he said to me, "I've been dying to ask you a question." And I said, "Sure, what's that?" He said, "Didn't you used to be somebody?" You know, when I first came in the program, I went to that group Banks was talking about. Actually, it was the St. David's group that I'm thinking about, where I first met Banks. And there was a very attractive young lady there, blonde, who worked up on Capitol Hill. And I'd been there about 6 months, and finally one night after me, she came across the room and she said to me, "You know, I just found out who you are." She said, "I figured all these people that knew you, you must have been a bartender up on the hill." Well, I just turned 60 last week, and I was reading the Big Book, and I saw that Dr. Bob and Bill W. Started AA in 1935. And it was either my ego or lack of humility, but when I read that, it was the first time it registered that they had begun in 1935. I immediately said, God spoke to Bill W. and Dr. Bob and said, you know, there's a guy coming along in about 3 years in 1938, and it's going to take you drunks about 50 years to make this total work for him. So why don't you guys start this program for Mike Deaver? But truthfully, I'm very humbled to be here tonight. I'm probably the first non-AA guru in a long time to speak at this distinguished group. Last year you had my Savior, Father Martin. Father Martin was where I ended up almost 12 years ago. And he got me sober. He taught me a lot of things. He told me a lot of very bad jokes, some of which I'm sure he told here last a year ago. The one that sticks in my mind, though, and I've never been able to get rid of it, is the story about the woman that called the zoo and said, I understand. He loves animal stories. So I understand you have a talking lion. And the zookeeper said, that's right, we do. And she said, well, that's impossible. There's no such thing as a lion that talks. And the zookeeper said, well, we have one. And the woman said, well, does he talk on the telephone? And the zookeeper said, yes, he does. And she said, well, could I speak with him? He said, just a minute. He came back, he said, I'm sorry, but he's on another line right now. Actually, there's a lot of cruel and unusual treatment at Father Martin's. But you know, with all of this that's happened to me in my life, I really do believe that the most profound thing about me is my alcoholism. And like many of you, I grew up in an alcoholic family. My mother and father were alcoholics. My mother's 91. She's still alive. She hadn't had a drink in about 25 years. She's never been to a meeting. She doesn't understand any of what I'm talking about tonight. My father died dry, not sober. I had a cousin who OD'd on vodka on his couch about 6 years ago. Harvard, Stanford Law. And at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he went down to get another quart of vodka because he'd run out. He was a member of AA. He'd been in AA for 5 years. And two things about his death I won't forget. One was my mother, because she still lives in California where my cousin lived, and I stopped by her house, which was about 50 miles from where he lived, because I was going to deliver a eulogy. And I wanted to stop in and see her, and I said, you know, I'm going over to speak at Clayton's funeral. She said, yes. Did you see the paper? And I said, what do you mean the paper? She said, the Bakersfield, California, the obituary in the paper. I said, oh. She said, it said he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, yeah. She said, well, we don't talk about those things. Why would they put those things in the paper? And I said, well, Mom, you know, that's probably why he's dead, because we never talked about those things. And so when I went to the funeral, most of the people there were members of the fellowship. And I found his sponsor, and I said, what happened? What happened to my cousin? He was a member of the fellowship. He said he never shared. He went to meetings 3 or 4 times a week. He never shared. So you see, my mother never talked about it. My cousin died because he didn't talk about it. So tonight, I'm grateful to be here to talk about it. Anyway, I went off to college, grateful to have left this family. They loved me. They gave me everything I needed, except they weren't there because alcohol was more important to each of them than they were to each other or to us. And by the time I left college, I was a daily drinker. I swore when I left home that I would never be what my father was. How many of us have said that? But here I was at the end of 4 years of school, drinking daily. And you know, I was thinking when I was kind of writing down some notes about this evening, I think I always knew down deep I was an alcoholic. I'm not sure. Consciously I wasn't obviously going to admit that, but there was something in me from the time that I first got drunk that I knew. In fact, I can remember saying to myself, the time will come when I'll have to stop. That went for a long time. At any rate, I did several things when I was a senior in college, and then for a couple of years after that I played the piano because I had a gift that if you could hum it, I could play it. And so I played in a piano bar, which was a great place for an alcoholic. And I then went on and got interested and involved in politics, and went to work for a guy named Ronald Reagan, who had just been elected governor of California. And I was with him for 8 years in California, the whole time he was governor. I met my wife, Carolyn, there. We had 2 children. And when he left office, I started a public relations firm in Los Angeles. And all this time, of course, I was drinking daily. And in 1976, he decided to run for president against Jerry Ford. And this was a wonderful, wonderful place for me to be, because we flew around the United States for a year on an airplane. I had no obligations other than to keep this airplane up in the air and money in the bank and to see that it all ran smoothly. But I was away from my wife and all of the problems with all of that. And the stewardesses would, you'd make 5 and 6 stops a day on those campaign planes. And the minute you get back on and wheels up, you had whatever your drink of choice was on your seat. And when you went home, to your hotel that night, there'd be one of those little barf bags filled with a half a dozen miniatures for everybody that got off the plane. And that went on for a year. And, of course, he lost the nomination. I don't mean of course, but he lost the nomination. In 1976, Ronald Reagan used to say politics was the second oldest profession. And I always thought it bared a great resemblance to the first. I had another fellow tell me one time that politics was like a venereal disease. You enjoyed it all the time it was happening, and it finally affected your brain. Anyway, it was an unsuccessful campaign in 1976. Went back to my office, and then in 1979, he decided to try again, and we went off and did the same thing all over again. And this time he won, and I decided that I didn't want to come back here. My wife didn't want to come back here. I didn't have any money, and but he talked me into it. And that was as you can imagine, an incredible experience. I drank during my life in the White House. I must say that I was in the White House at 6 o'clock in the morning, usually 6:15. I never left till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I usually went out in the evenings to some function, and had something to drink. But Sunday was my day. I mean, I really couldn't, during those first years in the White House, drink like I wanted to drink. I didn't have time. And I really wasn't at that point in my disease where I had lost control of the amount of alcohol that I was going to put into my body. But long about 1983, the end of it, 1983, it so happened that I had to go out to China 3 different times in a space of 6 weeks, 7 weeks. I mean, it was just back and forth. And, I had one of the president's airplanes, and I had stewards who knew what I wanted. And you were talking about 22-hour flights. And I got back from that third trip, and I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning over in Northwest Washington. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to drink. I mean, at 4 o'clock in the morning. I wanted to drink a lot of times, but this was the first time, and this was one of those things, that I'd always said, well, my dad would drink the first thing when he got up in the morning, but I've never done that. Well, here I was. And I said to myself, it's 7 o'clock in the evening in Beijing. Your body just hasn't adjusted yet. No wonder you need a drink. And that began what was the beginning of the worst time of my life. I'm not proud of that time. I know that all of us have these moments in our life that we'd like to forget, but it's not good to forget them, because if I forget them, I'll end up like my cousin on the couch. But towards the end, in the White House, I would be drinking vodka at 6 a.m. in my office in the White House. My office in the White House, I have to be careful. Most of us now know all of the real estate in near the Oval Office. And my office was the president's, used to be called the president's private study. I used to think drinking vodka at 6 o'clock in the morning was the worst thing that ever happened in there. At any rate, the president would come in at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'd pull my chair as far away from his desk so that he couldn't smell me. And so I said to myself that the problem was the reason that I was drinking like this, the reason that I had lost the ability to control the amount of alcohol that I put in my system was because I had this job. I mean, after all, I had the weight of the Western world on my shoulders. I was having to wake up every morning and take care of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, who wouldn't drink. I say that with affection. And so I left the White House in May of 1985 and thought I would be okay. I had ended up in Georgetown Hospital during the inaugural in January 1985, with what the doctors diagnosed as renal failure. And it was to the point where my brother was in the hospital room next to me because they were going to do a kidney transplant. The truth of the matter was, it was renal failure, but it was alcoholism. It was alcoholism and the blood pressure drugs that the Navy doctors were giving me in the White House, because my blood pressure was 180 over 130. So anyway, I got out, and within then I realized, geez, you've spent 20 years in public service, you have no money, no wonder you drink. I mean, you're going to have to drink until you can get $1 million or something in the bank. And in about 4 or 5 months, I had $3 million in the bank. And I was drinking vodka at 6 o'clock in the morning. And this went on. I tried to quit. I went to doctors. I'd do what we all do. Go through horrible nights of sweats and stop drinking for a week and so forth. At any rate, my wife went to California for a long weekend, and I was left at home with the kids, who were at that point, my daughter was 15 and my son was 10. And they kind of took care of themselves. I mean, kids can take care of themselves, right? You can drink. And Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I stayed in bed. And Monday, I called in to my office and said, I've got the flu. I stayed in bed. I had the same pajamas on for 4 days. And about 7 o'clock on Monday night, my daughter, who was 15, came into my room and said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, Amanda, I've got the flu." And she began to cry. And she said, "No, you don't. You're an alcoholic." And it was one of those, it was the point for me, because it was a flashback to all that time when I was growing up, going to bed, wishing I could get out of this awful house with this father. And here was the apple of my eye, the love of my life, standing in front of me, saying, "You are your father's son." I said, "Amanda, you're right. Get the doctor on the phone." The doctor came over. I checked into Georgetown. The next day I was at Father Martin's, and that was nearly 12 years ago, and I haven't had a drink since. When I left Father Martin's, Father Martin said to me, "You know, things are going to get better for you. You're going to be okay." And it was sort of right. I mean, I got indicted. I lost my business. I got convicted. I lost my home. The IRS came after me. It went on and on and on. But he was right. He was right. Because I did get better. And I not only learned how to get sober and to stay sober at Father Martin's, but for me, I learned something that I've never lost yet. That is that God loves me unconditionally. My higher power. And it's a tremendous, wonderful gift. Today, I'm doing well. I'm recognized in my field again as an expert. By most standards, I'm considered a success. But for me, the greatest success is inside of me. It's not what you see. It's not the fact that I've got money back in the bank and I now own a home again, and that people want to talk to me and seek my advice. It's what's in here. It's because for the first time in my life, I like me. David McCulloch, who was Harry Truman's biographer, said about Truman, there was nobody in the world he'd rather be. Wow. Well, I got news for you today. There's nobody in the world I'd rather be than who I am tonight, standing here talking to you. I'm happy with what I am. That's a tremendous gift. There are very few human beings that get that gift. My old friend Ronald Reagan had that gift. I think he still does. He may not know it today. But I remember years ago, when I didn't understand any of this stuff I'm talking about today, being with him in 1968, something like that. And we'd flown to New York because he was going to make a speech on Sunday morning, and we flew in Saturday night because, you couldn't get there Sunday in time. And Sunday around noon, he called my room and said, "Would you like to go for a walk?" He said, "I love to walk in New York." So we walked out on the avenue, and we'd taken about 10 steps, and all of a sudden there's a little crowd of people around us. And there was a little guy with one of these spiral notebooks, these nickel spiral notebooks, and a pen, and he looked at Reagan and he said, "I know you." He said, "I've seen you in the movies, I've seen you on television." And he thrust this little book and pen at Reagan and said, "Ray Milland." And Reagan signed it Ray Milland and handed it back to him. And we walked down the street afterwards, and I said, "Governor, why didn't you tell that guy who you are?" And he said, "Mike, I know who I am." I couldn't figure it all out. I didn't know what he was talking about. All this stuff that for 47 or 8 years just passed me right by. I had the great fortune one time to have lunch with Mother Teresa. Right. And I was so busy and important that I said to my staff, "Why am I having lunch with this woman?" I said, "Well, she wanted to have lunch with you." Okay. So we're having lunch, and I'm thinking about the 10,000 things I'm supposed to be doing in the White House, and so I said, "Okay, how many people die on the streets of Calcutta every day?" She said, "None." I said, "None? I read all the time about all these people." She said, "No, we pick them all up." I said, "You pick them all up?" She said, "Yes." She said, "Mr. Deaver, you don't seem to understand that giving is the greatest gift there is." I said, "Well..." She said, "Let me tell you a story. Not long ago, the sisters brought a man in who was dying of a cancer of the throat. And he was so diseased and dirty that they wouldn't touch him. And I put his head in my lap, sat down on the floor, and asked for a bowl of water and a cloth and began to wash away the filth and the grime. And he looked at me and said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "For the love of God." And she said to me, "Have you ever seen half a smile?" There's another thing I never knew. I never knew when I was so important the gift of giving, which is our 12th step. So you see, I've learned some things. I've not only gotten sober, but I've learned some things. I've learned that I can almost do anything I put my mind to, and I can even do two things at once. You remember that story about the old couple that were in their 80s and they'd been widowed, each of them, and they got married to each other, and on their wedding night, the old gal's upstairs, and she shouts down, "Say, come on up and make love to me." And the old guy said, "I can do one or the other." Well, I'm not saying I can do both of those things, but I can do things that I never could do before. I'm not saying that everything's great, and I'm not saying that I'm great. My higher power still has me on a leash. He has to yank it every now and then. About 3 years ago, my wife called me up on the phone, and I was in one of those days when things were going pretty well. A lot of people were the whole buttons were all lit up, waiting to talk to me, and she called me and she said, listen, I'm a little busy. She has an important job. And she said, I'm a little busy. Could you go out and pick up my car for me? I left it out in Rockville this morning. I said, well, I'm a little busy. She said, so am I. I haven't asked you to do this before. Would you please go get my car for me? I said, well, how in the hell am I supposed to get there? She said, well, you take the metro. I said, the metro? She said, yeah, ask somebody in your office. They'll tell you how to do it. Hung up. So I got on the metro about, is this on? I didn't do anything. Anyway, I got on the metro, and it wasn't bad. I mean, I had a seat. There were only about 10 people on the car I was on, and we were moving along great. And then I started looking at, the stations that we were passing, and I realized I was going the wrong way on the metro. So I got back on the metro, got off the metro, got back on the metro. This time, of course, it's like a sardine can, and we're all packed in, and I cannot move. I'm very pissed off. And there is a young black man, like right here, and he says to me, excuse me, but are you Mike Deaver? And I said, no. And he says, no, sorry.
My mic is tied into it.
Oh, your mic, you're taping. Ah. He said, you sure look like Mike Deaver. Oh, I stepped on it down there. Yeah. And I said, well, I'm not Mike Deaver. And about 5 minutes later, he said, I really wish you were Mike Deaver, because I'd like to say thank you. I heard you speak at a meeting 2 years ago, and I've been sober ever since. The old higher power yanking my chain. I told you about my daughter. I'm now talking about some of the things that's happened in my life since I got into this fellowship, other than being indicted and convicted. That daughter of mine, who was 15, was married last May, to the boy next door. She was 27. And I was there. Not only could I pay for it, but I could be a part of it. I could offer a toast that was meaningful and heartfelt. And I could enjoy that joy, and she could experience having a real father. This part of this program, which one of the fellows at our Saturday morning meeting described as being there, is very important. And he was talking about being there when his 90-year-old mother was dying last week. And just before she died, he was able to give her his 4-year chip. That's being there. I'm able to be there. Banks talked about Time magazine. There are some of these things that I can't deal with, I don't want to remember back about some of that stuff. And about 2 months ago, I got an invitation, along with all of the other living covers of Time magazine, to go to New York to the 75th anniversary of that magazine. And I brought it home, and Carolyn said, well, you don't want to do this, do you? And I said, no way. And about 2 weeks before the event, I was in the Safeway on MacArthur on Sunday, going through the checkout line, and a guy reaches over from the other checkout line and taps me on the shoulder. He says, "Pardon me," but he said, "You look very familiar. Are you somebody famous?" And I said, "No, I'm not. My name's Mike Deaver." "Oh, yeah," he said, "Time Magazine. That was the beginning of the end for you, wasn't it?" I said, "No, as a matter of fact, that was the beginning of the beginning for me." And I went home and I said to Carolyn, "Pack your bags. We're going to that Time Magazine dinner." And we were there with Kevorkian and Joe DiMaggio. But it was good, I was able to do that because my higher power gave me a reminder in that Safeway line of all I've got to be grateful for today. And I don't have to hide from that stuff. I must tell you that there were 85 of us at that dinner at the Radio Music Hall in New York. 85 that were fools enough to come to that dinner. And they introduced each of us by putting our cover up 3 stories high. I mean, it was enormous. But that's okay. Sobriety today is also, for me, is about comfort. In all those days I used to travel around with Ronald Reagan to every crook and cranny and nook and city and hamlet and town in this country, which we did. 2 presidential campaigns and 8 years in the White House, and a lot of little places all over the world. You know what I used to think about? I used to think about these places and say, this would be a good place. This would be a great place just to hide out. These little towns, these places, nobody'd know me, and I could just sit here and drink vodka. But I don't have to do that today. Sobriety is also about unconditional love. Because of my life, I have been in very powerful rooms. I've been in cabinet rooms. I've been with kings, prime ministers, popes. But there is nothing to compare with the power that's in this room here tonight, or any room that we go to. And there certainly is a hell of a lot more love and forgiveness in these rooms than there is in those powerful rooms. In 1987, I went to Russia with a small group of people, including Father Martin. And we went one night at 11:30 in the evening to the only AA meeting that was in the Soviet Union at that time. It was called Moscow Beginners. Started at 11:30 in the evening. They translated a page of the Big Book. It's one meeting a week. Translated a page of the Big Book at each of those meetings. About 150 people there. Some of them had traveled a day and a half. Unconditional love. It's the only place in the world. And it can change us. My motto used to be, don't get mad, get even. That was the kind of guy I was. I couldn't figure out why people didn't like me. I've been in the program about 7 years, when I took a job downtown at K Street, 14th and K, and there was a little coffee shop around the corner called Patty's. And there was a guy who had the office next to me, and he came in one morning and he said, I was in Patty's, and she said to me, there's a guy that looks like Mike Deaver coming in here every morning. And he said, well, that is Mike Deaver. And I said, no, this isn't Mike Deaver. This guy just looks like him. He said, no, I'm telling you, he's got the office right next to me. She said, no, it can't be. He said, look, he comes in every morning with Patty's coffee cup. She said, this can't be Mike Deaver. This is a real nice guy. But you know, Bill Wilson said, that there had never been from that first moment for him any question about the ultimate destiny of us all, or of God, or of justice, or of love, when he had that moment in the hospital room. And I had the moment myself. I mean, it wasn't for me a blinding light like it was for him, but I got it, whatever it was. And I'm grateful for all that I have. I hope you can tell from what I've said tonight that the thing that I'm most grateful for is this fellowship and what it's done for me. You know, I will never forget on one of my darkest days, which was the night before I was going to be sentenced. You know, you get convicted and then months later they sentence you. They let you sort of swing on the rope for a while. And somebody called me and said, on that day, would you like to lead the meeting at Foxhall tonight? And I did, and it was a powerful meeting. And as I was leaving, Gene S. stopped me and said, Mike, remember tomorrow, your higher power will be with you. And I said, right. And I got into that courtroom, and I was sitting there at that defendant's table, and the prosecutor got up to get one more pound of flesh and started reciting all of these terrible things that I had allegedly done. And I had a yellow legal pad that they'd provided me with a pencil, and it struck me what Gene S. was talking about. And I wrote Bob W. and Banks. I started writing names, and I got about 13 of the regulars that I remembered, and I put the pencil down, and I was fine, and she was right. That was my higher power. It was all of you. I'm going to end with something that has always been powerful to me, because in those darkest days in my early sobriety, I read a lot of Job. And there was a play by Archibald MacLeish where he got the Pulitzer Prize in 1950 for an American adaptation of the story of Job, and he called it J.B. And it was a, sort of a nuclear family, Job. But like in the story of Job, Job's wife never got it. She couldn't figure out how Job could have this great faith when their children were dying and the crops were burning and all the rest of it, and he kept saying, but God's got a plan. And then Job's wife gets it. And she gets a faith greater than Job's, you remember? And in the play, Archibald MacLeish describes Job's wife telling what she means about this faith. And she said, the candles in the church are out. There are no stars in the sky. But feed upon the coals of your heart, and you'll see by and by. Now, friends, that is what AA is for me. It has fed the coals of this heart for nearly 12 years. And I'm convinced if I keep coming here, keep reminding myself of what it was like, keep telling my story and my gratitude, and participating and helping and doing good works, I'm going to keep this comfort. I'm going to keep this ability to like me. And I'm going to have a continuation of a life that I thought was reserved for saints. Thank you very much.
Joe, what's the deal? We have we're going to close in the usual, unusual way. And I think that if we can figure out just to stay in your rows, I think, and hold hands as best we can. And what do you think, Joe?